right, everybody, welcome to Making the Familiar Strange. This is our first Making the Familiar Strange of 2024, so welcome and Happy New Year. I hope everybody, at least in the Omaha area, is keeping warm because here it has been frigid. So I thank you all for making it today. Our speaker today is going to be Anthony Cruz Pantojas, and the theme is making meaningful moments of connection. So for those of you who might be new, the goals of making the familiar strange is interfaith dialogue. It's an opportunity of people of different backgrounds, religious and non-religious, to have meaningful experiences from share meaningful experiences from their tradition. The program came out of the idea of shared scripture between the three Abrahamic faiths here on the Tri-Faith Commons, but we've expanded beyond that to share stories of faith traditions, personal practices, holidays, just shared experiences, both personal and kind of universal. And so we're just expanding a little bit of what this program means, but it's still just an opportunity to share whatever is meaningful to you. And it's to encourage perspective taking, looking at things in a new light and from new points of view. Hence the name. We have some ground rules that we share every time is to be respectful as possible, to challenge your own assumptions, speak from your own point of view, and to be open to new perspectives. A few upcoming events. We have Coffee on the Commons this Thursday from 11:30 to 12:30. So please join us for a warm cuppa. This actual book group with more that I'll be leading is not going to be on the 22nd. We haven't scheduled that. We're rescheduling that. And so, but keep your eye open for that because we will publicize it. We're reading The Hidden Roots of White Supremacy by Robert P. Jones. And I'll be facilitating that with Ajamal Minden from MORE, which is the Movement in Omaha for Racial Equity. We're going to be doing a race and religion program on January 30th on the doctrine of discovery. That's going to be here in person at the Tri-Faith Center. We're going to be doing an Abraham's Whiteboard called What We Talk About When We Talk About Religion. That'll be on Thursday, February 8th. And then our next Making the Familiar Strange will be Stories of Love and Sacrifice with Erlyn Perlado Martins, who is another of the emerging clergy cohort. And I think that's all I have. So get out of this. And so, Anthony, I turn it over to you. Please share a little bit about yourself and the cohort that you're a part of. We'd love to hear it, and then just you can lead the way. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Megan, for this introduction and just the privilege of being with all of you here present today, as well as those that will be listening or engaging with the recording in the weeks and years to come. My name is Anthony Cruz Pantojas. I utilize they, them series pronouns. I have the privilege of serving as the Humanist Chaplain at Tufts University in Medford, Massachusetts, as well as a chaplain intern at McLean Hospital, which is a psychiatric institution, also in Massachusetts. And the third plug I'll make, having the amazing opportunity of being part of this inaugural emerging clergy seminar, which is really seeking to advance interfaith, interreligious relationships and understanding. We are about a group of 14, 15 plus religious, spiritual, philosophical leaders across the spectrum. And the theme for our inaugural cohorts actually growing together, where we have just hit a little bit over the halfway mark. And it's definitely been an amazing experience being with, again, colleagues, peers, and soon to be very close friends across the United States that are really recognizing and reckoning even with the importance, or let me correct, critical importance of fostering, cultivating, and nurturing interreligious relationships for a better world.
Great, thank you. That was perfect. And this year it's been called the Emerging Clergy Seminar Cohort. And I think we're going to be expanding that name to Interfaith Bridge Builders, I believe, in the coming years. So it's not just clergy. We're just looking for leaders to train across the board, whatever that might look like. So I just wanted to clear that up if there's ever confusion in the future. It's that same program, but we're just expanding and building on it. So Anthony, back to you.
Thank you so much. Darn it, but that's part of growth, right? You continue to build and do better.
Your cohort is still the emerging clergy group. And
Oh
so,
no, it's just fun. I'm being silly.
it's all good.
So anyway, my topic today is meaningful moments of connection. And I'll just read a bit of the blurb just so that we can be contextualized together. This talk is really looking at the milestones to the ordinary moments. There is meaning in all of our life experiences. We're really seeking to explore the twists and turns and the emergence of what does it mean to pay attention to our everyday life, and especially how does it look like, and even what is the invitation for deeper practices where we are doing inner exploration. And I hope to just talk a little bit further, and then I'll open it up, because this is hopefully not a lecture. It's more of an interdialogic encounter between all of us here present today, and again, those that might engage with the recording in the future as well. So first of all, I mentioned that I serve as a humanist chaplain at Tufts University, so doing chaplaincy in higher ed. And so I just going to at least define my own understanding of humanism and what I have been experiencing and practicing for the past few years. Again, just a way of also expanding and opening up this space. So for me, humanism is a continued praxis. We're really looking at the connections of the theories of everyday life with meaningful practice, hence the title of my talk, and especially how do we be together, right? So again, centering this dimension of relationality. And in that process of relationality, looking at the complexities, the challenges, and the possibilities of when we are engaging with dimensions of culture, power, spirituality, our inner lives, as well as the outer, because we not only live within our own worlds, but of course, we're going out to the extent possible. And then ethics, right? So our values, our sources, our orientations put into practice. And specifically, the form of humanism that I practice is really also constructing a naturalistic and in spiritually, empirically centered practices. In other words, we're really looking at the capacities of the human or human beings being able to foster a more ethical, empathetic, and interdependent worlds. And so again, as I open up the space, I want to at least read a little bit of what I hope to bring for my talk. And then again, I want to do more practice than lecturing. Humans are makers or producers of culture. Throughout time and space, we have seen meaning-making processes utilized through culture to begin to understand, interpret, and live in our surroundings, right? And this includes our relationship with other human beings, other sentient beings, and everything else that's unfolding, including ecological realities. However, in the process of the human unfolding throughout thousands of years, we have seen that humans have, for good or for bad or more complex, developed structures, right? Either of religious structures, spiritual, philosophical, but also actual institutional structures to begin to really establish a way of making our everyday life experience, what can I say, more known, more controllable, more understandable in the way in which we are living. However, some of these structures that we have come to create for the context and particularity of this talk, looking at traditions specifically, how, for example, have these traditions provided for us spaces to connect with ourselves, connect with others, connect with the world, but also at times these traditions have been utilized to create borders, to create boundaries that either have kept us in and have kept others out. And so when we began to then explore our responsibilities, our call to action, to engage within the boundaries that are either physical, religious, spiritual, and so forth, how are these experiences over time and in our own spaces or geographical realities, Megan, as you mentioned, right, being in Omaha, for example, and I'm all the way in the Northeast, right? So actual geographical boundaries, how do we begin to contest or challenge those understandings? And specifically for the purposes, since I talked about the emerging clergy seminar, look at the symbolic or look at the religious. And then later on through our talk, I'm gonna, of course, begin to expand a little bit more. However, I wanna at least present my first question for us. And please feel free to utilize the chat or unmute. It is not a class, so you are all empowered to participate as much or as little as you want. So here goes my question, and I'll put it in the chat as well. What moments, preferably in recent time, have created a moment of interpersonal awareness? In other words, you in proximity to another and or creating a disruption. So phrasing it again, what moment in your life has created a moment of interpersonal awareness, or that moment creating disruption in your life? And yes, unmuted.
I feel I belong to Temple Israel, and I feel when I'm sitting there among people that I know and like, that there is a connection. And to me, that's more important than the dogma of Judaism. I grew up Episcopalian, and I now go to Temple Israel. I consider myself a spiritualist, but that's where I find it when I sit there and you know, it's been cold, so we've been on Zoom. But sometimes, you know, when you wake up and there's a song going through your head, you know, a tune that you can't get out, and usually it's something maybe from 2 or 3 decades ago. A lot of times it's the music that I've heard at Temple. And I don't know if I'm quite answering your question, but that's where I feel a connection. And it's not just one time. When I'm there, I just, I don't feel like I have to pay attention to every word of every prayer or what. I'm just there with my people that I love.
Thank you so much, Anne, for being brave and being the first. Beautifully stated. Anyone else?
I would agree that that moment when the Shema comes and the harmonies of the voices and the swelling of the voices, especially if I'm in the room, is always a moment of connection. And it's wonderful to think that this is happening all over the world and has been happening for decades and will be happening for decades. And it's a wonderful moment always.
So again, already in just these two examples, we're seeing processes of movement within and beyond specific traditions or theologies or worldviews. And when we are entering into specific brick and mortar spaces, as well as looking at traditions unfolding over centuries, we're seeing that we are either engaging in the more actual ritualistic dimension, and or we are engaging in relationships through the people that are in this space. And regardless of, for example, your level of intentionality around observance or practice, understanding or non-understanding of the languages utilized in the space, there is this exchange or negotiation of what am I risking today by being in this space? What am I seeking to bring into this space? What am I seeking to gain from this space? And at times, we might not be necessarily sitting down and asking these very specific questions, right? Because at times it becomes so rhythmic, right? That we are just doing it. We're not necessarily engaging in deeper processes of discernment. But yet we are sensing and practicing it as we go. Anyone else?
I think for myself, just coming to work at Trifaith, and I've been here just over a year, and just realizing like how much my circle of people and interpersonal relationships have grown, because in my previous job, I worked in a lab with 6 people for 14 years. So I just didn't have a lot of variety in my day to day. And even though those were deep friendships, of just how much that's expanded a diversity of religions and people and races and cultures, just by working here and being involved, and how sometimes that's disrupted because I'm confronting different ideas than what I've had, but how beautiful it is and how enriching it makes my own life. So.
And so, Megan, I think that you're leading us right into the next flow of this conversation. And it's basically, when do we then begin to move beyond just what a space, a tradition is offering us, to entering into the realm of popular imaginations or imaginings, right? Which is basically your response to the traditions that either you are inheriting, that you are wrestling, that you are disrupting or challenging or even transgressing, to saying, how is this specific resource or source of meaning connecting to my life or inner world right now? And specifically, again, in the spirit of tri-faith, how are we also paying attention to the notion of the missing, or who is not here right now? Right? Because again, as I mentioned in the beginning, how are we paying attention to the boundaries that are created either intentionally or unintentionally, that are keeping people, knowledges, practices outside? And so if we then begin this process of resisting acts of isolation and disconnect, especially looking at the traditions in relationship to traditions in context or histories, how do we then begin to say, where am I in this flow or spectrum? Am I just fine with the people I know, with the tradition or traditions that I grew up with and the sources that I have? Or am I willing to step beyond the boundary and begin to relate across and beyond? Why? Because it's so important for us to recognize that there is a world of possibilities, capacities, and meaning-making processes that we can engage with, not just to enrich ourselves, but hopefully to enrich ourselves, our communities, and the world. Or in other words, life itself hopefully is stretching us beyond our complacency, beyond the comfort, or the spaces in which we have somewhat more control. And so the second question that I want to pose for us is, where in your daily life, either through reading, relationships, work, you name it, are you being challenged? Right? And if you can't, if the word challenge is, it might be a little bit not right for you, what moment or action that you're taking emerging a little bit more of energy, right? When something happens, there's an impact of energy, right, that one is sensing or experiencing. And so I at least want to bring that up in this space. Specifically, again, as we're really trying to look at, again, the inner person moving now into the more interpersonal dimension. So you in relationship with others and the world.
May I hold on to an image that
Please.
came from Babylon 5, a sci-fi series that has a lot of philosophy in it when you pay attention to everything going on in it. And one episode, part of the main plot for that one involved saying, learning that we're all life is connected throughout the universe. All life, everything, not just, humans, ones that we know about, but everything. And it was visualized as a blue thread, and they would create like roads or pathways that you could travel down. And it stuck with me because at the time I was, still in the process of leaving the childhood faith that I had been raised in into the one I'm in, and helped me see that it wasn't a disconnect, because I'm on the autism spectrum and it's so easy to get stuck in my head and not feel connected to people because it's difficult to maintain those connections because it takes so much energy to do. And having that blue line, knowing that that connection is there, even if I don't consciously do anything about it all the time, it's still there, that I can reach out and still hold on to it and know that I'm connected to someone else, even if that person isn't in my immediate sphere of influence. And it helps. It creates kind of this visual in my head that I can latch onto when I need it.
Anyone else? You're muted, Ardith, if you're speaking.
Okay. We had an interim minister, Keith Heron, for a while at Countryside. And in one of his writings, he spoke about faith being like a cloud, like sometimes it's thick and heavy and sometimes it's just thin, and how it just changes so much, maybe even over a day, but over time or over your life. And just even seeing so many people who were different religions and changing their religions. I know I had to change from moving around from state to state. And I just thought that was a great analogy for faith. And still, you wonder if you're still faithful, but then you realize you can't be the same every day. So that helped me a lot.
I think that we have to, and I think I'm hearing what you're saying, kind of. I think we have to all of a sudden say, okay, are we happy spiritually where we are? And I am. It takes a long time sometimes. You feel, I don't know if guilty is the word, that you're not believing this or that or this, and all of a sudden you think, What's all that? You know, I'm comfortable where I am. I've discussed it with my rabbi, and he thinks I'm fine. The one before him thought I was fine. And all of a sudden I thought, you know, I'm just putting too much worry and too much work into it. Just let it be and be comfortable. And maybe some people can't do that. Some people need to have the dogma and have this and this and this. And I think all of a sudden I realized I don't have to do that. I hope that doesn't sound weird.
It's not. Thank you for Dory, our Ethan, and bringing that energy into the space, right? Again, why I wanted to engage more in a conversation and group dynamic than lecturing, though I see I'm talking a lot. However, I think that we're really moving into actually the example that I was going to bring, and that is how, for example, is faith being defined? Right? I mean, again, given the name Tri-Faith Initiative and the different projects that are emerging out of this several-year, decade-long process, right, of doing the interpersonal, the interpersonal, and the more systemic approach to what do we want to do, not just for our generation in our current time, but thinking about generations to come. And engaging then in this process of saying, are we utilizing language, aka faith, and of course everyone knows what it means, and or saying, actually, I know what it means to me and what it might mean to my specific group, and or my denomination, my institution, my specific branch of to whom I am affiliate or in relationship with. And even then, we see that there are tensions, disagreements, disconnections, challenges, resisting energies or drives, right? And so again, when we are doing this work, invoking what you stated, Dory, for example, of recognizing that not all humans are moving, existing, interpreting, and being in the same exact way, but for example, that there is neurodivergence in the world, that of course there's many languages and cultures and traditions and dominant, non-dominant cultures and so forth. How are we then beginning to pay attention to the power of history or histories within our own world? So lower H, right? Lower capital H. So the histories that we are embodying, that we are told, that we are living through processes of meaning making, and then capital H in your own context. And where is the human in all of that process? And specifically, as some of you mentioned, how are we utilizing the fonts of knowledge of my own history and communities to either continue to solidify what makes me feel comfortable, at ease, welcome, that I belong, and or, as we have been sharing for the last few minutes, 30 or so minutes, is there something else beyond the boundary? And am I willing to pick that up or not? And then if you're not, which is totally fine, how are you then siding with others so that others can pick that up? Right? So very important to pay attention to, as some of you were mentioning, that emotional charge. That is not just only within the person, it's the emotional in relation to communities, to groups, to spaces of choice, but also to our traditions. And when we begin to do the process of engaging in meaning making, we have named already in this space, I feel fine in my tradition. And others might say, you know what? I felt okay or good enough in this tradition or this philosophy or this life stance until a certain point. And then I transitioned or moved or transgressed those boundaries to seek something more expansive for me, my family, and so forth. Any questions, concerns, or contributions to the space?
Well, I'd like to bring up a framework that we use a lot at Tri-Faith that we've developed in the last few years is we call it the 5 Bs of so it's just the 5 Bs framework, but it's how people relate to the world, religion, all that. And it's belief, behavior, and belonging, which are
Oh.
pretty common 3 Bs.
Sure.
But we've added becoming and body.
Sure.
It's how, the way you've changed over time, how your body relates to it. And what's important about the framework is thinking, because it's not only about learning of another faith, it's a self-reflection. How do you relate within usually in our example, it's about religion, your religion to these 5 Bs, and to think too about how sometimes your personal relationship to any of those might be different than the majority. Like in some ways you might say, like, I am a Christian, but I behave this way, or I believe this way. That might be different than sort of the norm. And what's important about that too is, so not only reflecting on yourself, but then taking that again and reflecting it towards people of other faiths to realize that it's not a monolith, that it's not like, if I can say as a Christian, I can say I am a Christian, but I believe XYZ, then makes me realize, oh, there are going to be Muslims out there who are Muslim, but however, believe this, or behave this way, or that's different than kind of what's not the stereotype, but the most common set of belief systems, or whatever group, religious or otherwise. And it can just make you think that it's, oh yeah, well, if I'm sort of outside of bring some diversity of belief, behavior, belonging, etc., that other people can too. And so it's just like this back and forth relationship within your own belief, culture, practice, and someone else's. And it's just a really useful framework for that, I think. And that's sort of part of what you're talking about too.
Yes, thank you so much for bringing some of the intellectual works and production, right, of Rabbi Sherwin Wine and Mordecai Chaplain, for example, right? Again, really invoking a social science perspective to how are we grappling, navigating, and contesting, again, our own traditions. And for example, utilizing that framework that you introduced in the space, what power or center, let me say core, I was going to use another word, does, for example, religion play in my worldview, right? And what I mean by that is the same grappling that Mordecai Chaplain was doing in Judaism as a civilization, right? Of saying, is religion the main framework that I'm utilizing to then impose meaning or processes of meaning making, or am I looking at culture as that major fabric? And within the notion of culture, we have, right, and I'm not citing verbatim, right, but the arts, foods, customs, traditions, philosophies, literature, and so forth, right? And I think that that's really what I'm trying to introduce as well, right, in this conversation today, is how are we dislodging the notions of seeing the religious as all pervasive and dominant, to actually doing a reframing of, are we looking to ourselves first and recognizing that it is us who are doing the processes of meaning making, and then either utilizing a cultural, religious, and so forth frameworks. And so I think what I'm hearing you say too, Megan, right, is this interplay between how are we creating and constructing definitions or frameworks that then again are driving or leading our processes of meaning making individually, as a group, as a denomination, as a tradition, and so forth. Anyone else?
I have a question for you.
Yeah,
Since you work with different ages of people, and I presume some are university age, are you finding that they're looking for spirituality without so many, I hate to use the word dogma all the time,
yeah,
but so many rules and regulations? Because I know that, you know, we always, in reading and everything, we're hearing that so many of the younger people in all religions are kind of going away. And I wonder sometimes if it's because of that. They don't feel the freedom to just believe, you know, like you said, I'm a Christian, but I'm a Muslim, but, you know, if I don't believe this and this and this, then am I not, according to what my parents and grandparents believed?
Thank you so much, Anne, for that question. Actually, I am also, among many things, a trained spiritual director. And so I'm in the process of publishing an article where I am talking about a humanistic orientation to spiritual direction, and actually addressing that very question of how are we wrestling, for example, around the social, cultural, and religious demographics and changes and landscapes, where the current generations, even again beyond the higher ed age range, but everyone is really grappling with what categories are most meaningful for me, right? Because even if we are engaging in the spiritual but not religious, or the nuns, or the spiritually fluid, or spiritually questioning, there is again this interplay between culture, religion, communities, and so forth. So it's not that people have nothing, but as you stated the question, and it's people wrestling and grappling with this no longer holds the same core or energy or ethic that I am holding right now. And so I am looking again beyond those boundaries. And so I would say that yes, it is happening, and chaplains in higher education, I think, are doing the best that they can. And everyone, basically, but in my own context, of providing an ethic of accompaniment so that people, students, staff, faculty, and even our own selves and our own what I would call kin communities, right? So people that you're really in deep and vulnerable relationship with are doing that work of, do I remain within one particular tradition or philosophy or life stance, or actually am I feeling so depleted that I need to look somewhere else, but I'm not leaving, right? But you're willing to stretch and recognize that there's not one stream that can fully nurture you, right? Water your own inner world. And so I would say, at least for me, I do see this slight difference between the definition or concept of religion and the definition of spirituality. So even though there might be within religious traditions or practices of spirituality, I do find that spirituality does go even beyond definitions of religion. Anyone else?
So there's an image that came to mind as you were talking, and it goes back to, honestly, a movie called National Treasure with Harrison Ford.
Sure.
And they were looking to find this, they found this map, and they found the glasses that they put on, and the glasses had these different lenses that came down, and they could see different parts of the map with those different lenses. And the image that comes to mind while you're talking is that I feel like I'm just thinking of myself and two different family members right now. and I think about the different lenses that they look through the world at. And for me, that image helps me better understand what you're talking about, to see that this family member looks through the world through this set of lenses, and this through this set of lenses, and those lenses color their what they see in the world, and mine too. You know, I have my own set of lenses, so
Thank you so much, Lisa, for that statement, because that's beautifully moving us into the next set of conversations that I want to kind of guide us to. And it's basically this two concepts, and I'm not going to necessarily unpack it all because I'm keeping an eye on the time. One is interworld or interworlding, which is the definition of worlds existing within worlds, or the pluriversal, which is the understanding that there are multiple worlds existing at the same time. And so as I bring those two concepts into this conversation, Lisa, you're really bringing to the forefront and the center of this group that work of how are we utilizing the notions of archaeologies, right? Of unearthing our own, again, inner maps or inner world, and really navigating processes of how did I arrive to where I am? Right. And for some of us, that might be a very well thought out and mapped out image. And for some, it's very obscured. It's ruptured, it's fractured, it's not as linear or known. It might be even be hidden, right? So even though you're doing that work of unearthing, again, there might be some issues or challenges or resisting energies there because of our contested histories, either internally with family, actual family or chosen family, right? And just our families in relationship to a globalizing world and processes of immigration and migration and movement, where some histories are lost, where some experiences are actually hidden and really work to be forgotten, right? And so when do we then begin to pay attention to the processes of unearthing, to begin a process of, first of all, acknowledging, right, X and Y histories or moments or encounters, to begin a process of repair? Because our bodies, our vehicles and our modes of containing, as we know, according to psychology, right, historical trauma, generational trauma that are passed from generation to generation, even if spoken, unacknowledged, and so forth. And so it's very important to us when we are actually doing the work of, I want to be in community, I want to be in relationship with others. How are we actually paying attention to the question of, first, relationality and ethic? So if we are recognizing that by being in myself and beyond myself, especially in spaces of communities, do I need to question my framework or definition of ethics? How can I begin a process of reclaiming my own self and beginning to broach myself in the everyday life, and considering, as I said at the beginning of our talk, who is here in this space and who is not? Again, if you're able to do that work, always keeping an awareness and an understanding that we are always an interrelated ecology or ecosystem. Anyone else? Any thoughts, emotions, memories, or just aha moments, or as we've already seen, popular culture knowledge is being spoken in this space?
I'm not sure if this applies, but you know, when I started working a particular job, there were a lot of deaf people there. And so we started learning to sign. And it just shocked me that there's this whole culture of people that they're just sort of invisible. You just don't pay any attention to them because they don't have a voice. And, you know, they're so amazing and, you know, can really do anything. They don't really consider themselves, most of them don't consider themselves handicapped.
Right.
Because they say, well, my only problem is that you can't sign. So it was just amazing to me. So then you start wondering, well, how many other groups of people are there, or how many people do you just not see? You know, they're there, but you don't take the time to see them or talk to them or recognize them or, you know, spend any time with them. So.
I just recently was reminded of pragmatism, is defined as the only actual American-born philosophy articulated by William James. And I think I think it's a thing that it is a level for pretty much all Americans or USAians that most of us aren't aware of, you know, maybe haven't even had it pointed out to us, but the basis, at some level, the basis of our ethics is, does it work? You know, does it make something happen? And to do something spiritually, religiously, philosophically that doesn't make something happen, we just kind of go, why are you doing that? That, you know, that's and I think that that's probably a challenge for me when I encounter people from traditions or parts of the world whose ethic, you know, because to me it's not even optional. It's just a statement of fact, but it really isn't. It's us. It's how we evolved. And so I think it's a blind spot for me that I tend to go, you know, why are you doing that? Well, because they don't have the same pragmatic underpinning that I do.
So in a way, Laura and Ardith, what we're really navigating is, again, this notion of interworlding, recognizing that there are worlds, my world, between other worlds that are existing at the same time. And do we either have access or not, depending, again, on our ability, capacity, first of all, of language, of cultural access, or not? And if those are not present, is there a possibility through relationality and communal, through relationality, being guided in humility into a world that I do not know? And so when do we recognize and challenge notions of there is a dominant world, in this case, as we have seen through history, the Western notion of the world through colonialism, coloniality, and dispossession, and begin to say, as Laura, you were mentioning, actually, are there other frameworks of ethics beyond a pragmatist utilitarian understanding of something has value, worth, or meaning as far as it can be utilized for my own gain or goal? And or do I actually recognize that I partially know and that I should be hopefully transgressing my own worlds to be in relationship with others?
Well, thinking of an example like with Art of talking about the deaf community, I listened to a podcast years ago about Martha's Vineyard. And in Martha's Vineyard, there was this is maybe more either late 1800s or early 1900s, I can't remember the exact date. But there was a very high percentage of deafness, congenital deafness. So like everybody's family had at least one person that was deaf. And it was so common that they developed their own sign language. And so there was Martha's Vineyard Sign Language, and everybody learned it. So being deaf was not considered a handicap because everybody just communicated. And it just made me think of like, it's these same things of like, once you kind of make things accessible and you open up possibilities of just the, those silos come down, those walls come down, and real connection can be made in different ways. And I had a better way of summing that up, but yeah, if you change your framework, and the mindset can really have huge impacts. So.
And so as we get close to concluding our time, I think reflecting back is this invitation for all of us to think about what are some expansive ways to conceptualize my own world or worlds. Who is actually missing in my world or worlds? And what am I doing, can do or can't do within my capacity and power to expand my world to be able to include those that are missing? Or if it's beyond your world, how can you be at least in solidarity and relationship so that other people can begin processes of liberating, first of all, your own selves, recognizing that that's an ever unfolding endeavor, right, with challenges and limitations, pitfalls, and so forth. But how do I then do the work of liberating myself, hopefully leveraging my own power and capacities to aid others to do their own work for liberating their own selves? And in that process, then hopefully allowing for moments of flourishing and repairing our worlds. Any final thoughts?
Well, if nothing, if no one else has any questions, I don't want to take away
I
the
was-
chance.
I was just going to say this was a wonderful, enjoyable hour.
Absolutely.
It gives us a lot to think about. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. And I put a survey in the chat. It's just our standard Tri-Faith programming survey. So if you have anything that you would like to specifically comment on, we were happy to hear it. I'm also going to put a link to just our donation page if anybody wants to continue to support Tri-Faith and programming such as this and be able to get speakers such as Anthony. We appreciate that as well, but again, no pressure, just offering the opportunity and reminder of that. And if nothing else, I just want to thank you all for coming today. One of Anthony's colleagues from the Emerging Clergy Cohort will be doing our February and March Making the Familiar Strange. So we'll be getting a variety of speakers this year from that. And if any of you are interested or have topics that you would like to suggest, I can always find speakers to address topics as well. I'm always happy to get input on that. But other than that, thank you all for joining us today.
Be well, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you for your presence.